Hello everyone and welcome to Dave's Tech Tips. Today we're going to look at two things. First of all, we're going to show you a little bit more around component libraries. And the second thing is we're going to install the new Popup component using the component library feature. And this is really what you want to do. You don't want to install the Popup component for large deployments into the individual apps, because whenever there's a new version, you have to go into each app, remove the component, add the new one, and that's not ideally what you want to be doing. So with component libraries, we can deploy it once, and then all of the apps that make use of it can very easily be updated. So thank you very much for watching, and thank you also for the extremely positive feedback on the Popup component. We really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and like this video, and thanks for watching. Let's get cracking. So if you go into Power Apps on the left hand side under the app navigation item, you'll see that there are component libraries or a tab for it. And you'll also see that it's still in preview. It's fairly new. It's been there for a month or two. It's working very well, even though it's in preview. We're expecting it to be in production or general availability very soon. Obviously with Corona, that's been moved back a little bit, but by and large we've been having great success with component libraries, so don't be too scared of it. So essentially, if you go and create a new component library, you can bundle multiple components into one component library. And that's important because you don't want to end up with 50 different component libraries, but you still need the versatility to add ones that's only relevant to that app. So what we typically do is you might have something like a general app utilities, and just do that, and then create that library. Right, so there's our app library and or our component library. And you'll see that it looks very similar to an actual app, and that's because it is. It has all of the properties of an app, but it just has some additional things as well, which allows other apps to easily use components from this and then keep the inheritance as such. Right, so if you go into components, you'll see it creates one by default. So if you wanted to build one from scratch, you can then go and build it the same way you would a component in a normal app. The screen over here, you can go and test it and basically incorporate your newly developed component into the screen, test it, and then you can ultimately save and publish this and then consume this in other apps. Now, we're not going to do that today. We're not going to build one from scratch. The idea is not to drill into details about components and to show you how to build those. It's more how to use the component libraries. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to fetch the Popup component and then incorporate that into our component library. So to do that, we're going to head out to aka.ms/PowerApps-Popup, and we're actually going to go and download it. So here is the Popup component, and it's got instructions on how to use it. You'll see that the first set of instructions basically represents the installation steps without using a component library. So that's just if you wanted to get it up and running quickly and just want to get it into an app. Then the second set of instructions is the installation step with the component library. So basically we're going to run through these instructions now. And the first thing we need to go and do is to go and download it. So right at the bottom of this article, which is quite a bit down, you'll see that there are three files that you can download. The first one is the thumbnail, which is obviously not what you want for your component library. The second one is the component only. So if you're very familiar with components and you just want to get the component and get it into the library or into your app, you can just download that. And then the third file is the demo application that you can use to trial out and test out the Popup before you actually incorporate it into your apps. So we're going to be using this. So we're going to download this file. So if you click on that, you can download it to your local machine and then use that into our component library. I'm going to click on download and then download that zip file or that package to my local machine. So after the download is finished, we can now head back into Power Apps, not into the new component library that we created. Let's leave that alone. Let's go back into the apps itself. And now we're going to import that demo app that contains the component as a normal application. So we can test it out and try it out before we incorporate that version of the component into the component library, which will then distribute that to all of the apps. So let's go and say we don't want to export the package, we want to import it. So where's my import button? There we go. So let's go and import a package. So we're going to go and fetch that downloaded version. And for this video, we're going to be importing version 14. If you're following along, you'll import the latest one that's currently available. So now it's read through the package, it understands what it's working with. It can see it's a Canvas app, and it's by default it's going to create a new file. Just go and specify the version name as part of the resource name. And the reason why you might want to do that is to keep track of all of the versions, even historic versions. So as you import new ones, you can test it out, make sure you're happy with it before you incorporate it into your libraries, which will distribute it to your other apps. But then you could also always roll back to previous versions if you needed to for whatever reason. And we hope that never happens, but it just might. So it's not a bad idea. So now we're going to import this. And when the import's finished, it shows you that you're good to go. And if you now go back to the apps navigation item, you'll see there's the dev or the demo application that contains the component which we're actually after. So if we launch this, we need to just verify that it can allow the Office 365 connectors, and that's necessary because it's got an address dialog as one of the options. If we go to the demo screen, here are all of the different buttons so we can test the different layouts or the different combinations of pop-ups that you could do. So we'll go into a lot more detail in a later video on these things. For now, we're just handling the installation through a component library. So after you've now tested all of these things and you're happy with the way that it works, and you're happy with the functionality of the version that you're busy importing, we can now close this and go back into our component library that we created earlier on. And we can now go and use the import function, the one that we used to without component libraries. So we're now actually going to import this component from that dev app into the component library, and that's going to create a copy of it into the library and break the inheritance. So I can then go and delete that dev app if I wanted to. It won't affect the component library. So we're going to import all of the components in that app. And again, we just need to confirm that connector. And you'll see on the left under components, there's component 1, and that's the default component that came with the new library. We can delete that. We don't need that. And so there is our component that we just imported. So right now we're good to go. We can go and save this. We're going to keep the name to general app utilities. The icon is a book or library full of books, so that's good. We can keep that. You could go and add a bit of a description for other makers who might want to use this component or this library per se. Let's go and save that. And after now the first save, it's automatically published, similar to how Power App behaves. And at this stage, one thing you might notice, the share button, you don't need to share it with all of the users that you're going to be, that's going to make use of the apps that use the components in this library. The only reason you might want to share this is if you have other app makers in your company that you want to make this component available to, so that they can include the components from this library into their apps at the time of creating or authoring these apps. You'll share it with the other makers, but you don't need to share it with all of the end users who essentially consume the apps in the organization. So we've finished with this library. We can close it. It's now ready to go. And if we go back into our Power Apps Studio, we can create a blank new app we're actually going to be using this pop-up component. So for this, we're going to use a tablet layout. Doesn't matter, it works perfect on a phone as well. We're just choosing a tablet for today. So now to import that component, you might be tempted to go to Insert, Custom, and then go and choose the component from here. The problem is that if you do that, it's going to import a copy of the component the way that it did in the past, but it's not going to inherit the moment that you update the library. Also, you won't even see the library, so this is not going to work for what we want to do today. Similar, if you go to components and you import it from here, these two are essentially exactly the same. So it's going to create a copy. It's not what we want to do. The only way to import a component is if you, or from a library, is if you click on the plus icon over here, and at the bottom click on Get More Components. This is now going to give us a list of all of the libraries that are available, and in this case we only have the general app utilities library, but you might have multiple in your organization. And then you can go and expand that and choose the component that you want to import. And if you click on that, it's now creating a link between this application and this library under library components and the actual component library, so that when you update the component library, it'll enable you to easily update the component in the app as well. So if I now click on that, it's going to insert that component onto the screen that I had selected at the time of clicking on the plus sign. So there is my component. It's a shadow at the moment. There's some other steps we need to do, but there's essentially the component in the app, imported the right way from the library. If I go to components, you'll see that it's not listed over here because this tab shows you the components that reside in this app. This one doesn't reside in this app. It resides in the components library. It's very important to understand the difference between the two. So if we go back to the instructions, there's some formula that we need there, and scroll down, and we're busy with the instructions for the component library. So that's the second set of instructions. So now first thing we want to do is create a toggle, and then for that toggle we're going to use this default formula. Toggle is used to perform certain functions on responses that you get back from the pop-up component. So let's go to Insert, Input, choose a toggle, and then the default for this toggle, that's on change. It's very important that you put it in the right place, not like what I just did. And while we're busy with this, we can just go and copy that formula and replace the false. So the only reason why we do that is just to make sure that these toggles don't fire off when we don't want them to. So if I go back to the instructions, the next thing we want to do is the toggle on check formula, replace that with this thing over here. And this is then the actual logic where that'll fire off when it gets a response from the pop-up. So there we're going to set the on check, and that's important as well. And we're going to put that formula in the on check, and that's got a switch statement in it. We'll cover this in more details at a later stage, but that's got a switch statement in it that'll basically go and cover all of the different scenarios of data that you might get back from the pop-up, and then actually do something with those. Alright, so the toggle is ready. If we go back to the instructions, we can now go and create a button that for demo purposes is just going to call that toggle, so we can see what that'll look like. Insert a button. Let's call this initialize pop-up. And then the onSelect formula is going to be that formula that we just copied. Last thing we want to do is just go and set the visible property for that component. So if we go and copy that, come back into the app, and then on the component on the screen, you can then go and under the visible property, just go and paste that. And that should be all that you need. Now, you would need to just restart this app to make sure that all the toggles and everything just registers properly before you try and launch this. So let's call this our Popup demo app. Let's go and save that. This could be an existing app of yours as well. So if you wanted to replace or add functionality from the Popup into existing apps, you'd follow the exact same process. So let's close it. Open it up again. Let's go and choose the Popup demo app. And there it is. So essentially, if I go and look at this formula in the button, you'll see by default, this is just going to call an OK pop-up. And this is the message that it's going to display. So it's not going to do anything else at this stage. So let's see if it does that. And indeed it does. If you click on that button, the pop-up gets displayed on the screen. And you've got OK with the link. All of this is configured in this button. So essentially our pop-up is working very well. So now we're going to pretend that there's a new version of the Popup component available, and we're now actually going to deploy that to our component library and then to our apps. So that's obviously one of the very big benefits of using a component library, is keeping your components up to date through all of your apps. So to do that, we're going to go back into aka.ms/PowerApps-Popup, and we're going to go and download the latest version. So right now there isn't one, but we're just going to pretend that there is. So we're going to go and download the latest demo file. Like I said earlier, if you're really well versed in components and you just want to grab the component, feel free to do that. But I'd recommend that you actually get the dev or the demo app itself that contains the component like we did earlier. So we'll go and download the latest version to our local machines and then go and import it again. So we're going to go into apps and then import Canvas app. We're going to go and choose the package that we just downloaded for the latest version. Now in this case, I'm just going to import the same one again. It doesn't really matter because there isn't a next version yet. We're still working hard on the next release, which we're hoping to be an exciting one. But for now, I'm just going to import it, the same one. Power Apps isn't that clever to know that it's actually exactly the same component. So we're just going to trick it a bit. So when we go and create the new file, we're just going to say this is going to be version 15, and then go and import this Canvas app. Once it's imported, we can go back into apps and go and test it out. Obviously this one will work because it's the same one we worked in earlier, but you can go and make sure that it works well and works fine. And when you're happy with it and you're ready to deploy it to the rest of your apps, you can open up your component library, go and edit that. And from the components tab, we can now go and import the component. Now you'll see that there are now two versions. So if I hover over this, you'll see that's Dialog V14, and then this is V15, the new one that we just imported. So when I want to import the component from this one, select that, click on import. It's going to warn us that it's going to pretty much replace this component, and it's going to ask you if you are sure. And indeed, yes, we are. We're going to replace this. And then at the same time, I'm just going to manually update the version. So this is currently V14. So I'm just going to make that V15 and then give it today's date. And if you wanted to, you can go and add it to the screen. It's not necessary because we already tested it. We know it works. So this is quite important because this is going to tell your app makers what changes have been made into this component. So remember, we're not deploying this component for the users. We're actually deploying this component for the app makers. So we want to entice them to go and update the component. So we can go and say nice new functionality, and then we can save it. But until we publish it, they won't see it. So if one of the makers now open up one of the apps, nothing's going to happen. It's going to work exactly the same until we go and publish it. So the moment that we publish this, now it's going to trigger in the apps that there's a new version available. So if I go back into my Popup demo app, the one that we just created earlier, just before I close this, I'm just going to insert a label to just go and confirm what version of the component is currently running. So to do that, we're going to point it to component.version, and there you'll see it is using v14. So right now we're going to save this and publish it. Doesn't really matter. Just going to publish it because we can, and we can go ahead and close it. And the moment we now restart this and open it up in the studio again, you'll see that immediately it gives us a little notification at the top to say that there's new updates in the component library which might affect this application. So at this stage we can go and say, well, review. I want to see what's happening over here. And it'll show you in the generic app utilities component library, there's an update, and the update basically says nice new functionality. Now, what is important to note at this stage is you're not going to be updating individual components from the component library. You can basically go and update either all of the components in this library or none of them. And that's why it's also important to group your components correctly in your component libraries, because it also affects the way that you deploy updates. All right, so let's go and update this one. And the moment that we do, you'll see that the version now automatically just changes to v15, but everything else in this component will stay exactly the same. So if you went to set any of the properties, so let's say you went to set some of the theming or all of those sort of things, this metadata in the app stays exactly the same, so you won't have to re-add any of those settings. And if we now go and launch this, you'll see that it works exactly as intended. So at this stage, it might be a good idea to just restart the app before you do anything else and test anything else. I have seen that, especially with complex components, it's sometimes necessary for the app to restart. I don't know, I think it's possibly to register some hooks or triggers or whatever complex stuff Microsoft does in the back end to make all of this happen. But I have seen that it's sometimes necessary for a restart. So one last thing I do want to show you before we close off is how you would then create a copy of this in such a way that it'll never inherit from the component library again. So it might happen depending on your organization that one of your makers or you have access to one of the component libraries, but you no longer want to inherit updates from the library. You want to create your own copy of this thing, and you just want to use it in this app for whatever reason. You could do that, and like I showed you earlier, if we go to components, you'll see that there's nothing there at the moment because the component isn't in this app, it's actually in the library. So if we go to screens and you then right click on this and tell it to edit component, this is now going to create a copy of this, and it gives you this warning. And if we now go and say create a copy, and we then go to the components tab, you'll see there is the component in the application. So right now, this component is still the one inherited from the library. So it hasn't created or broken that link yet. So you can then go and delete this one and then add let me just go and do that. So delete that and then go to insert, custom, and then select it from the list here. And now essentially this component here is the one that is imported directly from this application. All right, so from here on forward, this app won't inherit anything from the library, or this component rather, and this is now a standalone version. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found this valuable. And if you haven't done so, please tell your friends and colleagues about this pop-up component so that we can all stop wasting time trying to simulate pop-up functionality. And also please subscribe, like this video, and hope to see you soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.